Hey guys, welcome to the Ruby on Rails video series. In this series we're going to learn how to use Ruby on Rails, learn what it is, what it does, and we're going to have 7 chapters with 3 to 5 sections each, and I'm going to briefly go over the chapters right now. So chapter 1, we're going to get a basic understanding of what Ruby on Rails and what Ruby is. So we're going to do a brief history, and then we're going to do some installation on Windows and Linux. This particular series is going to be based on Windows, but a lot of users and developers do use Linux with Ruby on Rails, so I will go over how to install it on Linux as well. And there's an optional video showing you how to actually install Linux, Ubuntu, onto on a virtual machine using VMware. And I mean, that's not something that's required for this course, but just in case you want to try it yourself, you want to mess around in Linux a little bit. We'll be going over in chapter 1 how to create an app, or an app framework, because Ruby on Rails it'll generate the actual framework for us. It takes the work out of us having to create it. So I'll show you how to start up an app and have it generate the folders and files. And we'll also be using Heroku and Git for version control. And so that's basically the gist of chapter 1. And chapter 2 is going to be all about the Ruby programming language, because Ruby on Rails itself is not a language. A lot of beginners think that it is a language, but it's actually a framework for building web applications with Ruby. So Ruby is its own language, and you don't worry about it if you don't know any Ruby, because a lot of people learn Rails and they don't know a lick of Ruby. What you do have to have a pretty well understanding of is programming in general. If statements, classes, stuff like that. So we'll be doing the introduction and history of Ruby, and we'll also be using a software called IRB, Interactive Ruby, and it's a program that lets us run Ruby on our Windows machine in a command line. Okay, and the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to go over some programming essentials, which you probably have a little understanding of: variables, functions, loops, if-else statements. And then we're going to go over the object-oriented properties of Ruby. Ruby is actually a pure object-oriented programming language, but you can also do procedural stuff as well. So that's chapter 2. Chapter 3, we'll be going over the Rails framework, and we're going to have a crash course on MVC, which is Model View Controller. It's one of the most popular and best, in my opinion, design patterns for any web app. So we're going to get into that. We're going to get into some configuration and routing stuff about the Rails framework, and we're going to do some scaffolding, and we're going to generate some code. We're going to generate some of the MVC stuff as well. Chapter 4, we'll be dealing with controllers, which is the C in MVC. Controllers, they control the response and request for HTTP requests, and also the URL structure. URL is based on the controllers on Ruby on Rails. And we're also going to be doing sessions, and we're going to show you how to render views from the controller. Chapter 5 is going to be the M in MVC, which is models, which generally has to do with the database, querying the database, and getting and setting stuff all from the database tables. We're going to generate a model, and we're going to talk a little bit about databases, because Rails can use either, by default it uses SQLite 3, which is a serverless database, and we can also use MySQL, which is probably what we're going to be doing. And I do want to say that these slides that I'm showing you now, they might not be exact as the course is when you get it. It'll be pretty much the same idea, but a couple sections might be switched around. So don't worry about that if you're not seeing the same exact slides, the same exact structure of this tutorial, this series. So we'll also be doing database migration, which is an awesome Rails tool that we can use to generate tables and table data. Active record is a component of Ruby that allows us to use the active record syntax and for querying databases. Chapter 6 will be the V in MVC, which is the views, which is what your users, your website visitors will see. It usually consists of HTML and CSS with some Ruby integrated into it. So we'll be generating a view. We'll take a look at templates and layouts, partials, helpers, and forms, and integrating HTML and CSS. And the last chapter, which is chapter 7, is going to be all about our project. And through the previous chapters, we might dibble and dabble in this project, but chapter 7 is going to be dedicated to actually creating it. And it's going to be called My Ruby Blog, and it's just going to be a blog platform for you to log in. We'll do user authentication, and you'll be able to log in and edit posts and create new posts and all that good stuff. So we'll get to do some CRUD, which is create, read, update, and delete, which every app essentially has something along the lines of what we'll be doing. So that'll be good. And then I'm going to show you. We're going to start with an empty, just an HTML CSS template. I'm not going to go into creating the HTML or CSS. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to assume that you already know that, because you should know basic HTML and CSS before you try something like Rails. And I will be referring to Ruby on Rails as Rails, just because it's easier and shorter, and that's usually what developers call it. So, and that's it. Then we'll launch our app, and by then you should have a really good gist. You should know all the basics and even some of the more advanced parts of Ruby on Rails. So let's dig in and start coding.